Welcome back to Theme Park Nonsense, and welcome to part 2 of me slowly and painfully going through 8 different videos produced by the suspected AI channel Echoes regarding ride accidents. In part 1, we saw some very questionable statements. Now we'll be going through the remaining 3 videos. What? 3 videos? I thought he said there were 4 left. There are technically 4 left. Just one is a re-upload of a video that we covered in the last part, and I was just too dumb or dumbfounded to notice this until now. Regardless, let's get into the video. We're going to be changing things up a little bit by starting with their water parks video, titled Stuck Inside, 13 Most Horrific Incidents on Water Slides. Oh boy.
As always, viewer discretion is advised. Sophie St. Jacques' excitement plummeted as she slid down the water slide at the aqua park, turning into a desperate scream as she was thrown off the float. Rolling uncontrollably, she painfully collided with its rigid walls. Suddenly, she was sucked into a closed water tube, leaving her husband uncertain about her well-being for several agonizing seconds. Did she manage to hold her breath to conquer that part of the slide? Would she emerge unharmed, or possibly break a leg, limping for the rest of her life? Could she hit her head, lose consciousness, and drown in the pool?
This little skit they just narrated is based off an injury a rider experienced on a whitewater Super Bowl slide at Calypso Water Park. I say based on, as what they describe here is very different from what actually happened. The rider was riding in a double raft on the Super Bowl slide named Steamer. When exiting the bowl, their raft went down backwards. When they hit the run-out pool, their raft flipped over and sent them back first into the water. I have actually had the exact same thing happen to me on a pro slide version of this slide. It's fairly common and unavoidable with really any tube slide. The rider in this example, due to unknown reasons, possibly due to a pre-existing condition, sustained serious injuries to their neck. They were able to make a recovery. They were at most submerged in waist-deep water inside the run-out pool.
Just how deadly can water parks be?
They are quite a bit more unsafe than dry parks. There are inherent risks that cannot be overcome at water parks that can be at dry parks. For example, wave pools will always be slightly dangerous due to their very nature, and water slides will always feature minimal clearances that allow riders to get their extremities caught in them when sliding. Think of the gap between the slide deck and a raft. These can be negated and made into less of an issue, but they will always exist at water parks, whereas they can be avoided at dry parks.
If you're curious about how the summer of 2023 unfolded in water parks, brace yourself.
I'm sure this will be driven home by a selection of random water slide incidents from over the last year. But this does not make 2023 particularly different from other years in this regard, and it does not mean water parks in general can be called unsafe. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of solid data on water park injuries, but estimates put a number of around 4,000 people injured to the point of needing assistance from an emergency room or hospital from water parks each year in the US. This is much more than the average of about 100 to 200 injuries in all of North America from dry parks each year.
In Omaha, USA, a 6-year-old boy lost his life. In Turkey, a tourist died on a 5-star hotel's water slide. In France, a father died in front of his daughter as their inflatable castle was blown away by the wind.
This is not a water park accident. If we want to talk about the inflatable side of the industry, that's a whole different topic, and I'd be happy to cover it, but it does not fit in this video, so it should not be mentioned.
Indeed, water slide injuries can happen, much like on a regular beach, ranging from minor scrapes to bruises. Yet, serious injuries can occur unexpectedly, as was the case at the Texas water park, Hawaiian Falls, with Lauro Casterjohn. On a Sunday morning in the summer of 2015, after attending church, he, along with his wife and grandson, headed to the aqua park. Lauro enjoyed water slides until he decided to ride the aqua tube, a closed slide with several sharp turns. Lauro jumped into the tube, joyfully sliding for a few meters, until he realized his body was no longer gliding. He understood there was no water around to aid the slide. He was stuck in the narrow tube, shrouded in darkness, and could barely move. The park staff had allowed the next visitor to descend. Within seconds, he felt a strong impact and lost consciousness.
The slide in question was a body slide and not a tube slide, and it was operating as intended with the proper amount of water. Due to unknown reasons, the rider got stuck in part of the slide. This is fairly common on these pool slider attractions. The ride lacked a light system to inform operators of if the slide was clear of the last rider. Instead, one operator at the top of the tower was responsible for overseeing both slides on the tower. The operator allowed another rider down the slide who collided with the rider stuck in the slide.
In the hospital, Lauro was diagnosed with injuries to his shoulder, head, spine, and legs. The water park administration claimed adherence to all rules, labeling it as a tragic accident. As compensation, they offered Lauro 3 free tickets to the aqua park. Furthermore, Hawaiian Falls representatives urged Lauro not to sue, reminding him of his non-US citizenship.
This is also not true. An insurance adjuster for the water park contacted the injured rider and stated that they were unable to file an insurance claim if the rider did not have a social security number. The water park's position through this accident was that they were following all manufacturer policies and procedures. Let's move on to the next accident.
Visitors generally trust that these attractions prioritize safety, but the president of one of the oldest U.S. water parks confirmed that injuries, even deaths on rides, unfortunately aren't uncommon.
Every amusement park, every water park has incidents and injuries, and sometimes tragically so. It's just part of the industry.
This clip was taken wildly out of context. This is the current president of Mountain Creek Water Park talking about the park's days as Action Park, a rather infamous park that was generally unsafe compared to modern water parks. To learn more about this park, watch the documentary Class Action Park, as that covers it in much more detail than I could ever dream of. That being said, his words are generally true even without context. Wave pools, for example, will always be unsafe. Even in the most regulated, stripped-back wave pool, there's still a genuine risk of drowning. Parks have made several advancements in the safety of wave pools, but there is still risk, and there will honestly always be risk. They are not like roller coasters or dry rides that can have their flaws directly engineered around.
Is the industry this cynical? Or are visitors to blame for their misfortunes? The answers led a British couple from Manchester, Jamie Norman and Vicky Holberg, to personally investigate in 2014.
They didn't go to investigate, they went on a vacation.
Aqualandia, known for having one of the world's tallest slides called Vertigo. After descending twice, he went for Vertigo again. As the operator began the countdown, showing Jamie a thumbs up and pressing the hatch release, a strange sound, unheard before, caught his attention a second before the drop. He panicked that something was wrong, but there was nothing he could do. Falling into the tube, Jamie felt something tearing at his leg skin. Then, he slammed his hands, and later his face against the partially opened hatch. Rolling into the pool, now tinted red with blood, chaos ensued.
This accident involved the trapdoor for the slide failing to stay open. In this case, it opened, then bounced back to an area where it hit the rider, then bounced back to open, then back to an area where it hit the rider, and then finally back to open. The trapdoor did not partially open, as that's simply not possible with the design of these slides. Trapdoor slides use gravity to open, so they will always happily be open. It's the closing that can suffer a mechanical issue.
These theme parks can't allow people on dangerous rides knowingly. Or can they? At a closed event on August 28th, their attention was drawn to the star attraction, the Aquasphere. It's a closed slide where 4 passengers ride on one raft, passing through 3 5-meter spheres and navigating turns at a 90-degree angle. Another green slide was designed for single or double rafts and had several circular turns. So, at the first party in the Aqua Center, people had fun going down the slides. That was until an unfortunate incident happened. One of the visitors hit his head on the inside of the tunnel. The injury wasn't too serious, so it was quickly brushed off. However, very soon, the situation happened again. This time, the victim's condition turned out to be much more severe. A bloodied visitor and an ambulance surely spoiled the grand opening of the Peninsula Center. Both visitors suffered brain injuries, with other victims reported later on.
These 2 slides were provided by Whitewater, and one is a constrictor slide, with the other, now named Python, being a hybrid slide with an aquasphere and a mini funnel. The injuries on Aquasphere were being caused by riders hitting their heads on other riders during the undulating sections of the ride in the darkness. This was addressed by adding a weight restriction to the slide and changing how riders sit. The Aquatic Center and Whitewater took steps to ensure that the slide would be safe prior to reopening. Unfortunately, these still proved to be inadequate.
For instance, a woman named Becky Morsetto ended up with a massive bruise on her knee and back pain.
I have sustained those same injuries on a slide. It happens on water slides, and there's really nothing that can be done to prevent it beyond what's already being done. Yes, sure, it is rare, and most of the time it does not require any serious treatment. Minor injuries like that do happen on water slides.
Another visitor suffered facial injuries, and all this happened on a new slide that cost almost $50 million to build.
There's no way these 2 whitewater slides cost that much. That's likely the cost for the entire Aquatic Center. These 2 slides were likely closer to $1 million, but even that seems a little high.
Nevertheless, the park administration had to close the slide for a whopping 10 months. After some minor adjustments, it was presented to visitors once again, and almost immediately, another unfortunate incident occurred. A father decided to ride the aquasphere with his 2 sons. The younger boy, around 7 years old, was thrown out of the raft inside the slide, rolling down without any protection. A father and an older boy were the first to fall out of the aquasphere. The worried man picked up his son, realizing his arm was broken. He looked around for the younger child and, in horror, realized he was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, the boy fell out of the tube. His entire body was covered in scratches and bruises, and he had lost consciousness.
This is described incredibly poorly, and it's clear that whoever, or whatever, wrote this has no idea how water slides work. The smaller rider was injured after falling out of the raft on the slide. Due to the steep drops and movements performed by the slide, injury in this situation is a little bit more likely than on other slides with less interesting elements, particularly in the entrance to the funnel section. However, the injury included bumps and bruises to the smaller rider. There were no broken bones. Out of an abundance of caution, the slide was closed while Whitewater investigated the incident. They ended up removing one of the aquasphere elements to make the ride less intense and more predictable. It was partially found that the darkness of the slide gave riders little ability to brace for these moments.
But the real nightmare for the park visitors was the steamer ride. It's like a colossal whirlwind that spins you around really fast and then spits you out through a tube into a pool. Just in one summer month of 2011, 10 people got injured on the steamer. During that season, a couple named Sophie St. Jacques and Mark Bertrand visited the park. The pair excitedly took their spots on the steamer's raft, zoomed down, and started swirling in this giant vortex. They did a few spins before getting close to the exit hole. That's when Sophie felt water completely engulfing her, heard a loud bang, and blacked out.
We talked about this accident at the start of the video. This is not what happened. The rider's raft exited the bowl in reverse. When the rider in the back of the raft hit the water, they flipped over backwards and underwater in the run-out pool. The strength of this hit with the water caused serious injury to the rider's neck for unclear reasons. The slide itself is not particularly unsafe. Like I mentioned, I've had the exact same thing happen to me on a similar slide model, though I was uninjured.
But if you think it affected the park's operation, or at least the dangerous ride, you're dead wrong. Calypso keeps running, managing to welcome, of course, around 22,000 people a day.
There's no way this park gets that kind of attendance each day. But again, there's nothing particularly unsafe about this ride or park. Water slides, like we talked about, do have inherent risks, and this water park is not unique in that way.
You'd think it couldn't get any worse, but oh boy, you're in for a surprise. In Vernon, New Jersey, there's a water park folks call the Accident Park, or Traction Park.
Oh boy, Action Park. I think it is fair to say that this park was actually unsafe, especially compared to modern water parks. But if you don't know much about it, I recommend watching the documentary Class Action Park instead of listening to this fool stumble around the topic. But it is important to emphasize that while the park is technically still open under the name Mountain Creek, most of its Action Park era attractions have been removed. The rides that remain have been scaled back and made more tame and much more safe. I'll skip most of the discussion on this park in the video, except for the next clip, which says something a lot of discussions on rides and roller coasters often get wrong. It's discussing Action Park's short-lived looping water slide.
While riding the loop, visitors experienced a G-force of up to 9 Gs. To put it in perspective, astronauts on Apollo 16 returning to Earth faced about 7 Gs.
This is something that's often mentioned when discussing rides. G-force on rides is not comparable to G-forces experienced by astronauts on launch or re-entry. Astronauts experience sustained G-forces. On re-entry in a capsule, these can be as much as 3 to 4 with spikes up to 6 or 7 Gs. This is experienced for several minutes at a time. Riders on amusement park rides experience instantaneous G-forces, usually lasting less than half a second, or at absolute most lasting only for a few seconds. ASTM has guidelines on what level of forces riders may experience on rides and for how long, since the public is not trained astronauts. 10 Gs is indeed way too much, and this slide was very unsafe, but it's not comparable to the forces that astronauts experience.
And though there's no global statistic, the odds of getting hurt seem higher on water slides than on any dry land rides in an amusement park. Often they lack safety belts, and the high speed turns what looks like soft and safe water into concrete.
As we have said many times at this point, they are less safe. This is not due to lack of seatbelts, but rather due to the dynamics of a ride such as a slide. Riders cannot have themselves protected by a ride unit like they can on a dry ride. There is also the inherent risk of drowning on rides with pools that can never be completely eliminated. Adding seatbelts like this video suggests would actually make these rides more unsafe. Imagine a tube slide with a runout pool like what was mentioned many times in this video. If riders had a seatbelt and their tube became inverted in a runout pool, riders could become trapped under the tube in an inverted position. Due to the buoyancy of the tube, they would be unable to flip back over. Anyway, with that, I think I've had enough of this. I'm pulling in someone just as knowledgeable about ride accidents, and someone who should be more upset about this channel's existence than me, Disasterthon.
If you are unfamiliar with my work, I run the Disasterthon channel, and I will be saving Coaster College by reviewing the next video, titled 6 Terrible Accidents in Amusement Park Volume 5. Jesus Christ. Let's get started.
On that May evening in New Jersey in 1984, a bunch of teens decided to spice things up and headed to the haunted castle at the amusement park. They expected skeletons and zombies, but what they didn't see coming was a new monster in the maze, aiming to turn them into ghosts themselves. How does a regular ride turn deadly? What are the odds of surviving when the carousel beneath you falls apart? And how often do amusement parks end up with one-way tickets for their visitors?
Not very often, according to the data this channel has cited in the past.
Enter September 2023, when a couple of friends, Davine Munez Cordeiro and Lorraine Ferreira, decided to try such an attraction after lunch at Mirabilandia, one of Brazil's most famous amusement parks. Cordeiro opted for a standard swing, as she wasn't into extreme rides. The ride started spinning, swinging in their seats. When the ride made another spin, Ferreira saw her friend lying on the ground, several meters away from the carousel. They urgently stopped the ride, but Ferreira couldn't reach her friend. What she saw was not a slip from the seat. The whole seat had detached with its chains. The park administration tried to shake off responsibility. The victim's family had to fight for justice in court. Mirabilandia closed temporarily after the incident. Yet after 40 days, it reopened like nothing happened, replacing the near-lethal carousel with another ride.
This just isn't what happened. The rider's seat fell due to excess corrosion on the chains attached to the rider's seats, causing the chain to snap. The park owners did cooperate with assisting the victim through the medical process. Though, with the investigation still ongoing, they have claimed that they took proper precautions to avoid this accident, and that some blame lies on the ride manufacturer. The park's 40-day closure did not end with the park's reopening like nothing had happened. Instead, changes were made to show maintenance procedures were documented, and as this video mentions, the accident ride was removed. I have made a full video on this accident that explains it in more detail.
17-year-old Sammy decided to hit up Luna Park in the French town of Cap d'Agde, even though the weather that evening wasn't top-notch, and they were expecting a storm all week. The amusement park was still open, so Sammy wasn't about to postpone his trip to Cap d'Agde. Heck, the guy went for one of the most extreme rides in the park, Adrenaline. Now, the deal with the Adrenaline is strapping visitors to cables, hoisting them up about 55 meters, and then releasing them into freefall at a whopping 110 kilometers per hour. So, Sammy and another 19-year-old girl got strapped in, started ascending the support structure, and finally, the ride operator gave the green light for the drop. That day, visitors felt a strong gust of wind, watching it carry 2 adrenaline passengers straight into the ride's support structure.
This was an actual example of complete negligence on behalf of the park and ride manufacturer. The ride in this example is a showman-made knockoff of a sky coaster type ride. In this case, it was run in high winds. This is something prohibited on actual sky coaster rides for exactly this reason. Let's jump into the next accident.
At the end of June in 2019, when residents of Uzbekistan headed to Istiklal theme park, they expected a good time. It's a fairly modest themed spot in Jizik. Perhaps the best and most extreme ride there was the Flying Saucer. It's a swing ride that rotates around its axis and spins 360 degrees, flipping people upside down. The Istiklal Park version had about 20 seats, but not all were taken that summer day. Still, many dared to give it a spin. When the Flying Saucer began a new cycle, the unimaginable happened. The ride's pole snapped, and the base with people fell to the ground from a height of about 6 meters.
This is actually a really sad accident for many reasons. The ride operating at this park was manufactured in Henan Province, China. Coaster College has an entire video covering these rides and why they are so unsafe. But essentially the ride was not manufactured properly, and it was likely sold to its owners in Uzbekistan under the premise that they were getting a quality ride at a low price. Ultimately, it's extremely tragic that this is the type of ride people in a lot of developing areas are exposed to, as these rides are genuinely unsafe and in this case, deadly. A similar accident happened on the next ride covered by this video, also from the Henan province, so we will jump ahead to that accident.
So, do amusement parks genuinely care about your life? Or are some rides literally designed for death?
No rides are designed for death. Yes, amusement parks care about your life. If for nothing else, it's entirely in the park's own financial interest to make sure that rides are safe. And as this channel has cited before, deaths at amusement parks, although do happen, remain extremely rare.
And here's the kicker. The deadliest incidents often happen in rides without a hint of thrill.
This is actually a really good point this video accidentally made. Thrill rides are built in more robust ways with more considerations made for restraining riders in the case of a malfunction. Take for example, 2 trains crashing on a looping thrill coaster with over-the-shoulder restraints, compared to a children's coaster with perhaps only a lap bar. This is only an example, but in the case of a slow-speed collision, such as in the station, the riders on a thrill coaster will usually sustain less injuries than those on a less thrilling coaster due to the design of the restraints. This is of course just an example, but it's a real thing to consider when it comes to ride safety.
Take the most iconic ride at Sydney's Luna Park, the Ghost Train. It started operating back in 1935 when the park was built. Yet just before closing, around 10 p.m., dozens rushed to this attraction. Among them were 5 teenagers, the youngest being Jason Holman, who won a prize at the shooting range and was hanging out with older friends, thinking it was the best night of his life. Plus, he was staying out without adult supervision for perhaps the first time. On the other hand, 6-year-old Damien and 4-year-old Craig stood in line with their parents, John and Jenny Godson. The boys begged for one last ride on the Ghost Train.
This channel has this strange habit of generating dialogue for the people involved in these accidents, just so that they can tell a better story. It's disgusting, and honestly it makes me like this channel even less. This accident and the last one they cover both have much more to do with bad fire prevention and control at the parks in the 70s and 80s more than anything else, so there's not much more to comment on. We'll jump to the end of this video for one last line though.
And even though this tragedy happened long ago, modern incidents make you think that attractions aren't becoming safer, and this can be confirmed by the subtle yet undeniable statistics. In 2019, in the USA, there were 101 shark attacks on humans. In American amusement parks that same year, 1,299 visitors were injured.
Again, according to the IAAPA study already cited by this channel in a previous video, the number of accidents on rides per year has decreased on average since data collection has begun. And while yes, there were more shark attacks than amusement ride injuries, That just goes to reinforce how rare getting injured by either truly is. While both sound scary, and it's easy to nitpick specific incidents because of how rare and well covered amusement ride incidents are, it's easy to lose context for them. While in 2019, there were indeed about 1,300 injuries on rides in all of North America, there are on average over 7,000 people injured in car accidents every day in the US. Ride accidents are bad, and the industry rightfully takes them seriously and makes every attempt to prevent them. Hyperfixating on specific examples and trying to make a villain out of the entire industry from them is simply irresponsible. With all that being said, we have reached the end of this video by this questionable channel. Hopefully my friend Coaster College has had a second to unwind and is ready for the last video. 10 accidents that turned into fun horror.
Be diligent and Google the age of the amusement park rides you frequent to know for sure if they're safe to use. However, old defective details are not the only issue with roller coasters. Watch the video until the end to find out what can kill you in an amusement park.
Oh boy, here we go again. So while there is a shred of truth to this, for example, today's B&Ms have a much safer design for their wheel assemblies than the Schwarzkopfs of years past. In general, any ride, regardless of its age, is just as safe as any other as long as it's maintained and operated properly.
I'm warning you though, viewer discretion is advised. June 13th, 2024.
Your title says June 30th, not 13th. Just wanted to let you know.
Bulgaria. A 42-year-old tourist from Ukraine was enjoying her evening leisure at Sunny Beach Luna Park. The operator sat her on the max adrenaline roller coaster, lowered the shoulder restraints, and started the engine.
There's no way bro just said started the engine. I think that proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that this is written by an AI.
The ride carriages started moving and accelerating. Finally, its steep climbs and descents had the passengers screaming in ecstasy. Suddenly, the woman fell from a staggering height of 7 meters.
The rider was ejected on a turn for the coaster, not while the coaster was inverted as this low-quality AI-generated animation shows. The coaster reportedly was having issues with its restraints leading up to the accident, though to have a catastrophic failure that could result in a rider ejection would require a lot of things to go wrong. Unfortunately, as of now, no official report for this accident exists, so everything I'm saying and he's saying is just speculative, though several government officials involved in the investigation have stated that they believe the rider would have had to try and escape from the restraints on purpose. But again, this is all speculation until a report is made.
So, remember, normally the shoulder restraint produces a recognizable clicking sound when lowered securely. If there's a gap between your body and the restraint, immediately inform the operator. If the problem hasn't been solved, leave the roller coaster immediately.
No. Rides use two main different types of restraints. Ratcheting restraints that do produce the click described, as they have mechanical ratchets that click into place, and hydraulic restraints, which usually make no noise, as they use hydraulic solenoids to secure the restraint. Funny enough, the one shown in this video as an example is the second type, which will not make any noise. One of the big advantages of this type of restraint is that it can lock in any position, whereas a ratcheting design can only lock in a few different predetermined ones. This means that on rides with ratcheting restraints, there will likely be a gap between your body and the locked position of the restraint. This is normal and no cause for alarm. It simply cannot be worked around with a ratcheting restraint. I have a video discussing the different types of restraints and how they work in more detail if you'd like to learn more.
October 20, 2023, Virginia. An 8-year-old boy was sitting snugly on the Storm roller coaster.
I hate to say this. This guy's making me feel like it's 2018 all over again. This was not a roller coaster.
Which he had picked himself out of all the other rides at a fun fair. It's a roller coaster that simulates a powerful storm. The carriages spin in circles at a dizzying speed while also rotating around their own axis.
This is not the same ride, though it goes by a similar name, so I can see why this AI program chose this footage. But funny enough, it's promotional footage from a Henan province ride manufacturer. The ride being shown is genuinely unsafe, but the ride being talked about is not.
Suddenly, as soon as the mechanism accelerated, the boy started slipping under the railing, which was supposed to keep him in place. During a sharp turn, he got thrown out of his seat.
This accident is interesting. Third-party investigators determined that the ride was maintained as designed by the ride's manufacturer, Wisdom Rides, with no mechanical failures. It was also being operated as designed. Truly, there's no simple explanation for why this happened, and we'll likely never know more. It's possible that the rider freed themselves from the restraints intentionally, but again, this is all speculation. The ride would have its height requirement increased after this accident to 56 inches, well beyond the manufacturer recommended minimum of 51 inches.
Yet, on the following day, something suspicious happened. The minimum height required to go on the ride was increased. Most likely the roller coaster's engineers had made mistakes in their calculations, but didn't want to admit it.
All other Wisdom Rides Storm examples have kept the same height requirement. The height was raised by the ride's owner, this particular showman, out of an abundance of caution. Ride designers consistently evaluate their ride restraints and emerging problems through the ASTM F24 committee. If something was to have been done wrong by the designers, they would let all owners know about it.
That's why it's best to avoid going on a ride if your height is close to the minimum required.
This isn't necessarily bad advice, but it's also not completely good advice. Perhaps a little bit too conservative, but I guess it's not exactly a terrible idea.
April 2011, Warrington, Cheshire County, United Kingdom. 20-year-old Emma Neild was sitting in the car of the Antelope ride in the Gulliver's World amusement park. This roller coaster is known for its steep descents and climbs. The car sped up and took sharp turns, but Emma didn't feel the anticipated euphoria, since the dramatic oscillations were forcing her head to rock chaotically forward and backward.
This ride is not a high-thrill coaster. It's a small wooden roller coaster designed for children. In this case, the rider was jostled around by the ride to the point that they were seriously injured, possibly due to an undiagnosed pre-existing condition.
This is what scares me the most in some roller coasters. You can only realize that something went wrong after the mechanism's been set off. Yet since everything around you is hurtling somewhere at a staggering speed, you can't escape or even give some kind of sign to the operator.
This ride did not experience any kind of failure. It was operating correctly and normally.
Before the ride is started, don't be shy to ask the operator how exactly you need to secure yourself and what exactly to hold on to. This will give you crucial information for a safe ride and incentivize the operator to check every system more thoroughly, since there have been instances when one small fault with the ride that went unnoticed by the employee and park owners led to a massive tragedy with more than 1 or 2 victims.
This is also decent information. Rides are designed for riders to brace themselves by holding on. Riders not doing this may have caused injuries like what was covered in the last accident.
August 14, 2019, Ahmedabad, the Indian state of Gujarat. Balvatika Amusement Park near Concordia Lake was, as always, welcoming crowds of visitors. The Discovery roller coaster.
This is the third time that this has been mentioned in this marathon of videos. This ride is not a roller coaster, but is instead a very unsafe pendulum ride made in Henan Province, China. If you want to know more about these rides, watch my video on these manufacturers. Let's go to the next accident since we've already talked about this one enough.
However, it's unknown exactly how the case ended. Remember that as a park visitor, you have the right to request documents confirming that the ride has gone through a technical assessment. So don't shy away from using this right if you're unsure of the roller coaster's safety.
You absolutely do not have this right. I mean, I guess you do have the right to ask, but no one is under any obligation to show you anything. Besides, the term technical assessment could mean anything. Some states do keep records of all the rides they inspect, and if you're in the US, this can be requested through a public records request. But it's far easier to simply look for a state inspection sticker on a ride if you are that concerned. This only works in areas where government actively inspects rides though.
February 11th, 2024, Salou Tarragona, Spain. A woman named Raquel, with her partner and 2 kids, aged 8 and 6, went on the Tomahawk roller coaster in the luxurious Portaventura amusement park in Salou Tarragona on the coast of Catalonia. While the train was speeding forward, a strong gust of wind felled a tree growing near the ride. Large, heavy branches started falling right onto the tracks of Tomahawk. Raquel and the kids had the time to lean down and avoid serious injury. On the other hand, the woman's partner was rather tall, so he failed to evade the blow. The man sustained injuries and went unconscious. Yet the ride operator wouldn't have been able to react that fast anyway. And even if he'd stopped the mechanism, the carriages would have continued moving due to inertia.
Ooh, these AI must be getting smarter. This accident happened due to high winds in the area that caused a tree to fall near the ride. Some riders were injured by branches from the tree but made a full recovery. Rides in high winds are closed, partially for this reason, and partially due to risks of trains valleying, or essentially getting stuck due to being pushed back by the wind. Not closing the ride in this case could have been due to the wind not reaching the level where the ride needed to be closed according to its manufacturer and the park's guidelines, or a sudden gust of wind above this threshold after the train was already in motion.
Park employees always have to pay attention to weather conditions to be able to stop the operation of the ride until the weather stabilizes. So just in case, don't go on roller coaster rides during strong wind or, even worse, in the rain.
There's no inherent risk of riding rides during high winds or rain. That is, as long as the park is following manufacturer guidelines related to the weather, as some rides are affected by these conditions and some are more than others. Check out an entire video I made on how weather affects rides.
Still, sometimes the reason for an accident can be even more unpredictable. In Zender's Splash Village Water Park, the ride reaches 83 meters in length and is famous for its rapid descent with a 360-degree loop. Minutes later, the woman was aghast to see that visitors were being evacuated from the ride. The park employees were gathering around it, and someone's body was covered with a sheet. For 9 days, London kept fighting for her life, but on February 27th, her heart stopped beating. But what happened in the water ride's pipe?
Nothing. The ride, again, operated normally. The rider had an undiagnosed pre-existing condition that led to their death under the forces of the slide. This type of accident happens a few times a year, every year, at amusement parks. Some people may have conditions, sometimes that they're not even aware of, that make rides unsafe to them.
This case shows that roller coasters aren't always at fault, so it's essential to do regular health checkups.
Finally, some advice I don't have to dispute. However, I don't like how this frames the rider involved in the last accident as not doing these things, which there's no evidence for.
Tell me in the comments, what was the most dangerous ride you've ever been on? Were you afraid something would go wrong? I don't want this video to make you give up on fun things, but I hope it will make you weigh in all the risks, not just in amusement parks.
Again, as Disasterthon stated, the risks presented by amusement parks pale in comparison to the risks presented by things we do in our everyday life. Driving, for example, sees more than quadruple the people injured every day in the US than people injured every year on amusement rides in the US. The 1,300 injuries per year in North America on rides is roughly average, but on average in the US, around 78,000 people every year are injured by slipping and falling in the shower. We can play the statistic game all day long, but ultimately rides are a safe leisure activity. I can't believe we have finally gotten to the end of all of these videos. I hope this is the last video I have to make about this scummy channel, but who knows. Regardless, if you made it to the end of both videos, thank you for sticking with it, and thank you for watching. Stay tuned to my channel for more videos covering the details of how rides work and the details of accidents that have happened on them. Thanks to Disasterthon for helping with this video. Be sure to check out his channel as well, as he has detailed information and balanced coverage of the human side of these accidents, which I choose not to cover on my channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.